Emma Blake had spent 8 years perfecting the art of being unremarkable in Cedar Falls, Wyoming, managing Blake's Corner Market with the quiet efficiency of someone who desperately needed the world to forget she existed. What the town didn't know was that their mild-mannered grocery store manager could kill a man in 17 different ways using nothing but items from aisle 3. When 4 armed robbers stormed through her doors on a snowy Tuesday morning, they thought they were targeting an easy mark. They had no idea they'd just walked into the domain of Delta Force's most lethal operative, callsign Viper. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cedar Falls sat in the shadow of the Rockies like a town that time had politely agreed to overlook. Population 3,847, elevation 6,200 feet, and the kind of place where the biggest excitement usually involved arguing over snow removal schedules at town hall meetings. The main drag stretched for exactly 4 blocks, bookended by Murphy's Hardware on one end and the Cedar Falls Diner on the other, with Blake's Corner Market sitting right in the heart of it all like the town's quiet pulse. Emma Blake had bought the struggling grocery store 8 years ago with cash, no questions asked, no credit checks run. The previous owner, old Pete Morrison, had been hemorrhaging money for years and jumped at Emma's offer without bothering to dig too deep into her background. Smart man. Some stories were better left untold, and Emma's was written and classified. Ink across 3 continents. At 34, Emma carried herself with the controlled grace of someone who'd learned to measure every movement, every gesture, every breath. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held a depth that made people instinctively step back when they tried to read too much into them. She wore the same uniform every day, dark jeans, comfortable boots, and a navy polo shirt with the store's logo embroidered over the left breast pocket. Practical, unremarkable, perfect camouflage. The store itself reflected her personality, meticulously organized, efficiently run, and designed with sight. Lines that would make a security consultant weep with joy. Every aisle had multiple escape routes. Every blind spot was eliminated through strategic mirror placement. The cash register sat positioned so Emma could see both entrances simultaneously while maintaining cover behind a reinforced counter. She'd renovated herself. The locals had their theories, of course. Dorothy Murphy, who came in every Tuesday for her weekly shopping, was convinced Emma was running from an abusive ex-husband. "You can see it in her eyes," Dorothy would whisper to anyone who'd listen at the diner. "That girl's been hurt bad." Carl Jensen, who delivered bread 3 times a week, thought she was probably in witness protection. "Government types," he'd nod knowingly. "Seen him on TV, always relocate people to small towns like ours." Sheriff Bob Turner, a 20-year veteran of rural law enforcement, had run her background check when she'd first applied for her business license. Emma Blake's history was clean as mountain snow. No criminal record, excellent credit, references from previous employers that checked out perfectly. But Turner had been a cop long enough to recognize when someone's past had been professionally sanitized. Emma's background was too clean, too perfect, like someone had taken an eraser to the messy parts of her life and left only the acceptable bits behind. What none of them suspected was what Emma kept hidden in the basement storage room of the market, behind cases of canned goods and industrial-sized bags of flour. A carefully maintained weapons cache that would make a small country's military jealous. Combat knives, tactical firearms, body armor, and communication equipment that didn't exist in any civilian catalog. All of it preserved with the obsessive care of someone who understood that the difference between life and death often came down to proper maintenance and split-second access. Every morning before opening the store, Emma would descend into that basement and run through her routine. Weapons check, communication systems test, Physical conditioning that left her moving with the fluid precision of a predator who'd never quite learned to be prey. Then she'd emerge, flip the store's lights on, and become the friendly neighborhood grocer who always remembered her customers' names and never forgot to ask about their families. Kyle Chun, her 17-year-old stock boy, worshipped the ground Emma walked on. He'd been working part-time at the store for 2 years, saving money for college, and couldn't understand why someone as smart and capable as Emma had ended up running a grocery store in the middle of nowhere. "You could do anything," he'd tell her while they restocked shelves. "Why stay here?" Emma would smile and give him the same answer she gave everyone who asked. "Sometimes the best place to be is exactly where you are." What she didn't tell Kyle was that Cedar Falls represented the first place in 8 years where she'd slept through the night without checking the locks 3 times and keeping a loaded weapon within arm's reach. The morning of Tuesday, February 15th, started like any other. Emma arrived at the store at 5:30 a.m., an hour before opening, to receive the daily deliveries and prep for what promised to be a busy day. A late-season snowstorm was rolling in from the west, and experience had taught her that bad weather meant customers stocking up on essentials, like they were preparing for the apocalypse. She moved through her opening routine with practiced efficiency. Lights on, register systems activated, coffee brewing in the small break room that doubled as her office. The delivery trucks arrived on schedule, and Emma supervised the unloading with the kind of attention to detail that impressed drivers who'd seen every kind of operation from mom-and-pop stores to major chains. By 7 a.m., the store was ready for business. Emma positioned herself behind the counter with a cup of coffee and the morning's inventory reports, her eyes automatically scanning the empty aisles and calculating sight lines, escape routes, and defensive positions. Old habits died hard, and some habits were too valuable to kill. Kyle arrived at 7:15, stomping snow off his boots and complaining good-naturedly about having to scrape ice off his car windshield. "Morning, Emma. Storm's supposed to hit us pretty hard today. You think we should close early?" Emma looked up from her paperwork, noting the way Kyle moved, the slight limp from an old basketball injury that would slow him down if things went sideways. Not that she expected them to. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where the biggest crime of the year usually involved teenagers spray painting the water tower. "We'll see how it develops," she said, filing away Kyle's position near the front entrance in case she needed to factor his safety into any calculations. "Storm's not supposed to peak until this afternoon." The first customers began trickling in around 8 a.m. Morning commuters grabbing coffee and pastries, elderly locals beating the storm to stock up on medications and groceries, young mothers with toddlers in tow picking up forgotten items for school lunches. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that they were being protected by someone who'd spent 6 years turning violence into an art form. Emma knew each customer by name, their buying patterns, their family situations, their predictable routines that made her job of keeping them safe infinitely easier. Mrs. Dorothy Murphy with her Tuesday shopping list written in the same blue ink on the same notepad she'd used for 20 years. Frank Patterson stopping by every morning for his coffee and lottery ticket. Always the same numbers, always the same hopeful smile. As the morning progressed, Emma found herself settling into the comfortable rhythm of small-town commerce, ringing up purchases, restocking shelves, listening to Kyle's excited chatter about his upcoming college interviews. For a few precious hours, she almost forgot about the weight of her past, the nightmares that still woke her up at 3 a.m., the constant vigilance that had kept her alive through missions that officially never happened. But at 10:47 a.m., as the first heavy snowflakes began falling outside, Emma's carefully constructed peace shattered like glass under a sniper's bullet. Bell above the front door chimed, and 4 men walked in wearing heavy winter coats that hung wrong on their frames, moving with the aggressive confidence of predators who'd found their hunting ground. Emma's mind processed the threat assessment in milliseconds, concealed weapons, coordinated movement, facial coverings that weren't quite right for the weather. Her hand moved instinctively toward the modified cash register where she kept her first line of defense, while her eyes tracked each man's position and calculated their probable intentions. Kyle was restocking the cereal aisle, completely oblivious to the danger that had just walked through their door. Mrs. Murphy was examining produce in the back corner, her mobility limited by arthritis and a hip replacement that had never quite healed right. Two other customers browsed the aisles, going about their morning routine without realizing their lives had just changed forever. The lead man, built like a linebacker with prison tattoos creeping up his neck, approached the counter with the kind of smile that promised violence. His three companions spread out through the store with practiced efficiency, blocking exits and controlling angles of approach. Professional work, but not professional enough to fool someone who'd been trained by the best killers the U.S. military had ever produced. "Morning," the leader said, his hand moving toward the bulge under his coat. "Nice little store you got here." Emma smiled back, her fingers finding the hidden switch that would activate the silent alarm system she'd installed herself. Not that. She expected local law enforcement to arrive in time to matter, but Sheriff Turner would eventually need to know what had happened here. "Thank you," she replied, her voice carrying the same friendly tone she used with every customer. "Can I help? You find something?" The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that had seen too many fights and not enough dentists. "Yeah," he said, pulling out a sawed-off shotgun with practiced ease. "You can help me find all the money in that register." Behind him, his three partners revealed their own weapons, 2 pistols and another shotgun, all aimed at the innocent. People who'd made the mistake of choosing Blake's Corner Market for their Tuesday morning shopping. What they didn't realize was that they just declared war on someone who'd spent 6 years turning war into a profession. Emma Blake, mild-mannered grocery store manager, took a slow breath and felt the familiar calm settle over her like armor. Viper was about to wake up. The world slowed to the hyper-aware crawl that Emma remembered from firefights in Kandahar. Every detail became crystalline, the way the leader's trigger finger rested along the guard, instead of on the trigger amateur hour, the nervous twitch. In the second gunman's left eye that screamed inexperience. The way the third man kept glancing toward the rear exit, already planning his escape route. The fourth positioned himself near Kyle, using her teenage employee as a human shield. "Everyone on the ground now." The leader barked, his voice echoing off the store's tile floors. "This is a robbery. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt." Mrs. Murphy dropped her bag of apples, the fruit scattering across the linoleum as she raised her arthritic hands with shaking fingers. The other customers, a young mother with her toddler and an elderly man, Emma recognized as retired postal worker Jim Hendricks, immediately complied, fear paralyzing them into submission. But Emma remained standing behind the counter, her hands visible and empty, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested cooperation while keeping her muscles coiled for explosive action. Years of close-quarters combat training had taught her that positioning was everything, and right now she held the tactical advantage if she played it smart. "I said get down," the leader shouted, swinging his shotgun toward Emma's chest. "Easy," Emma said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to de-escalating volatile situations. "No need to get excited. Register's right here." She gestured toward the cash drawer, her movement drawing the gunman's attention exactly where she wanted it. What the robbers didn't notice was the almost imperceptible shift in Emma's stance, the way her weight settled onto the balls of her feet, or how her breathing had shifted into the controlled rhythm that preceded lethal action. They saw a scared store clerk trying to cooperate. They missed the predator calculating kill shots and extraction routes. "Kyle," Emma called softly to her young employee, who stood frozen beside a display of breakfast cereals, his face pale with terror. "It's going to be okay. Just do exactly what they say." The boy nodded, tears starting to track down his cheeks. Emma memorized his exact position, 12 feet from the gunman, using him as cover, directly in the line of fire if shooting started. She'd have to eliminate that threat first, fast and clean, before the amateur could panic and pull his trigger. "Smart girl," the leader grinned, approaching the counter. "Open that register and nobody has to." Emma's right hand moved with snake-strike speed, grabbing a can of green beans from the display beside the register and hurling it with deadly precision. The improvised projectile caught the leader in the throat with enough force to crush his windpipe, sending him staggering backward as his shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. Acoustic tiles and fluorescent light fragments rained down as Emma vaulted over the counter, her body moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years perfecting violence as an art form. The second gunman, positioned near the produce section, tried to swing his pistol toward the unexpected threat, but Emma was already inside his decision loop. She rolled behind an end-cap display of soup cans as his wild shots sparked off the shelving around her, then came up with another improvised weapon, a 10-pound bag of flour that exploded in a white cloud when it connected with his gun hand, destroying his aim and temporarily blinding him. "What the hell?" the third robber started to shout, but Emma was already moving, using the flour cloud as concealment to close the distance between them. She emerged from the white haze like something out of a nightmare, driving her elbow into his solar plexus with enough force to empty his lungs and send him crashing into the frozen food section. The fourth gunman, the one near Kyle, finally processed that their easy robbery had turned into a massacre. He grabbed the teenager around the neck and pressed his pistol against Kyle's temple, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "Stay back. I'll kill him. I swear to God, I'll blow his brains out." Emma froze, her hands raised in apparent surrender, but her mind was already 3 moves ahead. The gunman was right-handed, holding his weapon at an awkward angle to maintain his grip on Kyle. His stance was unbalanced, weight shifted forward onto his left foot. Amateur mistake that would cost him everything. "Okay," Emma said, her voice returning to that same calm, reasonable tone she'd used to start this dance. "Nobody needs to get hurt here. The boy's done nothing wrong." "Shut up," the gunman screamed, his fear making him sloppy. "You killed my friends, you crazy bitch, you killed them." Emma glanced at the 3 men she'd dropped in less than 30 seconds. The leader was unconscious, possibly permanently damaged from the throat strike. The other 2 were groaning and trying to regain their breath, effectively neutralized but still breathing. She hadn't killed anyone yet, but this last idiot was threatening Kyle, and that changed the equation entirely. "Let him go," Emma said, taking a slow step forward. "Take the money and walk away. This doesn't have to end badly for you. I said stay back." The gunman's voice pitched higher, panic overwhelming whatever limited training he might have had. His grip on Kyle tightened, and Emma saw the boy's eyes rolling back as his air supply was cut off. That sealed it. Emma's left hand shot out and grabbed the pepper display from the nearest end cap, one of those rotating racks loaded with small bottles of spices. In one fluid motion, she hurled the entire display at the gunman's head while simultaneously diving to her right, drawing his automatic fire away from Kyle and the other hostages. The spice rack exploded against the wall behind the gunman's position, sending bottles of pepper and paprika flying in every direction. But it served its purpose. The sudden impact made him flinch and loosen his grip on Kyle, just enough for the boy to tear free and dive behind the nearest display. Emma rolled to her feet and charged, covering the 15-foot distance before the gunman could reacquire his target. Her shoulder caught him in the midsection with the force of a linebacker hitting a practice dummy, driving him backward into the dairy cooler with enough impact to spiderweb the reinforced glass. His pistol went flying, clattering across the tile floor and sliding under the magazine rack near the front entrance. The gunman tried to throw a wild punch, But Emma caught his wrist and twisted it in a direction human joints weren't designed to go. The wet pop of breaking bone echoed through the sudden silence of the store. "Jesus Christ, lady!" he screamed, falling to his knees and cradling his shattered wrist. "You broke my arm. You threatened my employee," Emma said matter-of-factly. Her breathing barely elevated despite the explosive violence of the past minute. That was a mistake. She looked around the store, taking inventory of the situation. 4 gunmen neutralized, all breathing but definitely out of the fight. No civilian casualties, though Mrs. Murphy looked like she might need medical attention for shock. And Kyle was hyperventilating behind the potato chip display. The other customers were starting to emerge from their positions on the floor, staring at Emma with expressions that ranged from awe to absolute terror. The mild-mannered grocery store manager they'd known for 8 years had just turned into something out of an action movie, and they were having trouble processing the transformation. Emma walked calmly to the phone behind the customer service counter and dialed 911, her voice professional and controlled when the dispatcher answered. "This is Emma Blake at Blake's Corner Market on Main Street. We've had an attempted armed robbery. 4 suspects in custody, no serious injuries. We'll need paramedics for shock treatment and possible minor trauma. Sheriff Turner should probably handle this personally." As she hung up the phone, Emma realized that her carefully constructed life of anonymity had just evaporated like morning mist. In less than 2 minutes, she demonstrated capabilities that no civilian should possess, using techniques that weren't taught in any self-defense class available to the general public. The questions would start soon, and with questions would come investigations. And investigations had a way of uncovering secrets that were supposed to stay buried forever. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, and Emma could already hear sirens in the distance. Sheriff Turner would arrive soon, followed by paramedics, probably some state police investigators, and eventually federal agents who specialized in cases that didn't quite add up to normal explanations. Kyle emerged from behind the chip display, his young face pale but determined. "Emma," he said quietly, "that was the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life. Where did you learn to fight like that?" Emma looked at the boy she'd protected, then at the customers she'd saved, then at the 4 men groaning on her floor, who'd made the mistake of thinking the small-town grocery store would be an easy target. "Sometimes," she said, echoing her standard response to difficult questions, "the best place to be is exactly where you are." But as the sirens grew louder and the snow continued to fall, Emma Blake knew that her time in Cedar Falls was about to become very complicated indeed. Sheriff Bob Turner burst through the front door of Blake's Corner Market with his service weapon drawn, followed by deputies Martinez and Sullivan, their boots crunching on the scattered glass and acoustic tile debris. Turner had been expecting to find a crime scene, possibly a bloodbath given the 911 call's terse efficiency. But what he discovered defied every assumption he'd made during the 7-minute drive from the station. 4 armed men sat zip-tied against the dairy cooler, courtesy of the industrial-strength cable ties Emma kept in her maintenance kit. 3 were conscious but clearly in significant pain, while the leader remained unconscious, breathing but unresponsive. Their weapons lay neatly arranged on the customer service counter, like evidence prepared for court proceedings. Emma stood calmly beside the register, a first aid kit in her hands as she tended to a cut on Mrs. Murphy's forehead where the elderly woman had struck the floor during the initial chaos. Kyle sat nearby, wrapped in emergency blanket Emma had produced from somewhere, his color slowly returning to normal. "Jesus Christ, Emma," Turner breathed, holstering his weapon as he took in the scene. "What the hell happened here?" "Armed robbery attempt," Emma replied matter-of-factly, applying a butterfly bandage to Mrs. Murphy's cut with the precise efficiency of someone who'd treated combat wounds in considerably worse conditions. 4 suspects, all apprehended. No serious injuries among the customers or staff. Deputy Martinez was already photographing the scene while Sullivan began reading rights to the conscious suspects. But Turner's 20 years of law enforcement experience told him something was seriously wrong with this picture. Armed robberies in small towns usually ended one of three ways. The robbers escaped, the victims were hurt or killed, or law enforcement arrived in time to prevent disaster. They almost never ended with 4 professional criminals neatly packaged and waiting for pickup. "Emma," Turner said carefully, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened here." Emma finished with Mrs. Murphy's bandage and helped the elderly woman to a chair behind the counter before turning to face the sheriff. Her expression was calm, cooperative, but Turner noticed something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Cold calculation that made him instinctively check his own weapon's position. 4 men entered the store at approximately 10:47 a.m. Emma began in the clinical tone of someone giving a professional briefing. They were armed with 2 shotguns and 2 pistols. The leader approached the counter and demanded money from the register while his accomplices positioned themselves to control the other customers. Turner pulled out his notepad, though something told him this wasn't going to be a standard robbery report. Then what? "I assessed the situation and determined that compliance would likely result in civilian casualties," Emma continued. "The suspects displayed poor weapons discipline and showed signs of substance impairment. I made the tactical decision to neutralize the threats." "Tactical decision?" Deputy Martinez looked up from photographing the unconscious leader. "Ma'am, are you former military?" Emma's hesitation lasted only a fraction of a second, but Turner caught it. In that brief pause, he saw her weighing options, calculating risks, deciding how much truth she could afford to reveal. "I had some self-defense training," she said finally. Turner looked around the store again, noting details he'd missed in his initial assessment. The pattern of debris suggested the leader had been struck with something thrown from behind the counter. The second suspect showed signs of blunt force trauma and was covered in what looked like flour. The third had clearly been driven backward into the frozen food section with considerable force. The fourth clutched a wrist that was obviously broken. "Some self-defense training," Turner repeated slowly. "Emma, I've been to crime scenes where trained police officers couldn't subdue 4 armed suspects without backup. You're telling me you handled this alone using self-defense techniques?" Before Emma could answer, Kyle spoke up from his position, wrapped in the emergency blanket. "Sheriff, you should have seen it. She moved like something out of a movie. That guy grabbed me and put a gun to my head, and He gestured helplessly, unable to find words for what he'd witnessed. "She saved all our lives," Mrs. Murphy added firmly, her voice still shaky but determined. "Those men came in here meaning to hurt people. Emma stopped them." Turner nodded, but his mind was racing through possibilities, none of them pleasant. Emma Blake's background check had been clean, but now he was remembering details that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The way she'd renovated the store with security features that seemed excessive for a small-town grocery. Her habit of positioning herself with clear sight lines to all entrances. The fact that she'd paid cash for the business and never seemed to have financial concerns despite the store's modest profits. "Emma," he said carefully, "I'm going to need you to come to the station for a full statement. This is a complex scene, and we need to document everything properly." "Of course," Emma agreed. "Kyle, are you comfortable giving a statement as well?" "I know this was traumatic." The teenager nodded, his admiration for Emma clearly overriding any trauma from the experience. "Whatever you need, Sheriff. Emma's a hero." As the paramedics arrived and began treating the suspects and checking the other customers for shock, Turner pulled Emma aside near the magazine rack where one of the discarded pistols still lay. "Off the record," he said quietly, "who are you?" "Really?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "I'm exactly who I've always been, Bob. A woman who runs a grocery store and tries to take care of her community. Women who run grocery stores don't usually neutralize 4 armed men in under 2 minutes, Turner replied. They don't use terms like tactical assessment and neutralize threats. They don't treat combat injuries with medical precision or secure crime scenes like they've done it before. Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching as the paramedics loaded the unconscious leader onto a stretcher. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Turner had never heard before. Sometimes, people have lives before the lives they're living now, she said. Sometimes those previous lives taught them skills they hoped they'd never need to use again. And sometimes the world forces you to remember who you used to be. Turner studied her face, seeing layers of truth and concealment that made his cop instincts itch. Emma, if there's something in your past that's going to come back and bite this town, I need to know about it. These weren't local criminals. Professional weapons, coordinated assault, escape routes planned. This feels like something bigger than a small-town robbery gone wrong. Emma's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. What makes you think they weren't local? Because I've been doing this for 20 years, and I know the difference between desperate locals and professionals, Turner replied. These guys had military-grade equipment and training. The question is, were they here randomly? Or were they specifically targeting you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Emma looked around the store, her sanctuary, her carefully constructed refuge from a past that seemed determined to find her anyway. I honestly don't know, she said, and Turner believed that she was telling the truth. But I think we're about to find out. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and Turner noticed unmarked vehicles beginning to arrive. Federal license plates, government-issue sedans, the kind of cars that showed up when local crimes turned into national security issues. Emma, Turner said urgently, whatever's coming, whatever this really is, you need to know that this town considers you family. We protect our own here. Emma smiled for the first time since the robbery began, and Turner saw a glimpse of the woman he'd known for 8 years, the quiet, competent business owner who remembered every customer's name and never missed a town council meeting. I know, Bob, she said. That's exactly why I can't let anything happen to any of you. As the federal agents approached the store's entrance, Emma Blake realized that her 8-year vacation from her real life was officially over. The only question now was whether Cedar Falls would survive learning who she really was. Agent Jonathan Hayes stepped through the shattered entrance of Blake's Corner Market like he owned the building, his expensive suit somehow remaining immaculate despite the chaos of broken glass and scattered merchandise. Behind him, 3 more agents spread out with the practiced efficiency of a team that had worked together for years, their eyes cataloging every detail of the scene with professional interest. Hayes was tall, lean, and carried himself with the quiet arrogance of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. His credentials identified him as FBI, but Sheriff Turner's instincts suggested something more specialized, the kind of federal agent who showed up when cases crossed into territories that didn't officially exist. Sheriff Turner? Hayes approached, with his badge extended, though his attention was already focused on Emma, who stood calmly beside the customer service counter like she was waiting for the next customer to check out. Agent Hayes, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We'd like to speak with Ms. Blake about this incident. Turner positioned himself between Hayes and Emma, his body language making it clear that federal jurisdiction or not, this was still his town. Agent Hayes, we're in the middle of processing a crime scene. Ms. Blake has been cooperative and is scheduled to give a full statement at my office. That won't be necessary, Hayes replied smoothly. Miss Blake's situation falls under federal purview now. We'll handle her statement. Emma stepped forward, her voice carrying the same calm efficiency she'd used with the robbers. Gentlemen, I'm happy to cooperate with whatever agency needs information, but I'd prefer to finish ensuring my customers and employee are properly cared for first. Hayes studied Emma with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Ms. Blake, your actions today were quite remarkable. 4 armed suspects neutralized by a civilian using improvised weapons and hand-to-hand combat techniques. That's not something we see every day. I was lucky, Emma replied. They were obviously amateurs, were they? Hayes pulled out a tablet, swiping to a series of photographs. Marcus Petrov, the leader. Former Spetsnaz, dishonorably discharged for excessive violence during peacekeeping operations. Viktor Kozlo, explosives expert with ties to Eastern European criminal organizations. The other 2 have extensive records for armed robbery and assault. Hardly amateurs, Miss Blake. Emma's expression didn't change, but Turner noticed the almost imperceptible shift in her posture weight, settling onto the balls of her feet, hands moving to a more neutral position. Combat readiness disguised as relaxation. If they were professionals, Emma said carefully, then I was very lucky indeed. Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Luck is an interesting word choice. Tell me, Ms. Blake, have you ever heard of the Kandahar incident? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Emma's face remained perfectly neutral, but Turner saw something flicker in her eyes, recognition, calculation, and what might have been fear. I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to, Emma said. 7 years ago, Hayes continued, consulting his tablet, a Delta Force extraction team was ambushed in the Kandahar province of Afghanistan. 12 Taliban fighters, heavily armed, positioned in a compound designed for defense. The extraction team consisted of 4 operators, call signs Bishop, Knight, Rook, and Viper. Turner felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Kyle, still wrapped in his emergency blanket, looked between Emma and Hayes with growing confusion. The official report states that the team successfully completed their extraction mission despite overwhelming odds. Hayes went on. 12 enemy combatants neutralized, 0 friendly casualties. But the interesting part, Ms. Blake, is what? The report doesn't say about how 4 operators took out 12 entrenched fighters in less than 3 minutes. Emma remained silent, but Turner could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was calculating options, escape routes, threat assessments for everyone in the room. The after-action reports described tactics that were unconventional. Hayes sighed. Improvised weapons, environmental exploitation, close-quarters combat that turned a disadvantageous situation into a rout. It sounds remarkably similar to what happened in your store today. Agent Hayes, Turner interrupted, his patience wearing thin. If you have specific charges or questions for Ms. Blake, I suggest you get to the point. Otherwise, she's free to leave. Hayes ignored Turner, his focus entirely on Emma. The thing about Delta Force records, Ms. Blake, is that they're heavily classified. Operators' real names are buried so deep that even we have trouble accessing them. But sometimes, circumstances force people out of the shadows. Emma finally spoke, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. Agent Hayes, I don't know what conspiracy theories you've been reading, but I'm a grocery store manager in Wyoming. I've never been to Afghanistan, and I have no connection to any military operations. Really? Hayes swiped to another screen on his tablet. Because we have satellite imagery from your property showing some very interesting modifications to your basement storage area. Reinforced walls, ventilation systems that suggest weapons storage, communication equipment that requires federal licenses to operate. Turner's blood ran cold. If Hayes was right, Emma had been running what amounted to a safe house in the middle of his jurisdiction, and he'd never suspected a thing. I'd like to see your warrant for that surveillance, Emma said calmly. Hayes's smile widened. National security provisions don't require warrants for suspected terrorist activities, Ms. Blake, and harboring military-grade weapons without proper authorization falls under those provisions. Now wait just a damn minute, Turner stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. You're talking about a woman who just saved civilian lives, not some terrorist. Emma Blake has been a model citizen in this community for 8 years. Has she? Hayes turned his attention to Turner. Sheriff, how much do you really know about Emma Blake's background? Her previous employment, her references, her financial history? Because our investigation suggests that Emma Blake didn't exist before she purchased this store 8 years ago. The words hit Turner like a physical blow. He'd run her background check himself, but now he was remembering how clean it had been, how perfectly organized, how every detail had checked out without any of the messy complications that marked real people's histories. Kyle spoke up from his position near the counter, his voice cracking with emotion. I don't care who she used to be. She saved my life today. She saved all of us. Hayes glanced at the teenager with something that might have been sympathy. Son, sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones keeping the most dangerous secrets. Emma looked around the store, at Kyle, at Mrs. Murphy, who was still being treated by paramedics, at Sheriff Turner, whose world was clearly being turned upside down, at the federal agents who turned her sanctuary into an interrogation room. Agent Hayes, she said quietly, if you want to have this conversation, we should probably have it somewhere private. These people don't need to be involved in whatever this is really about. Hayes nodded, recognizing victory when he saw it. There's a federal facility in Denver where we can discuss your situation more thoroughly. I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest to cooperate fully. Turner stepped between them again. Emma, you don't have to go anywhere with them. Not without charges, not without a lawyer, not without... It's okay, Bob, Emma said. And Turner heard something in her voice that sounded like goodbye. Some conversations can't be avoided forever. As Hayes's team began preparing to escort Emma from the store, she turned to Kyle one last time. Keep an eye on the store for me, she said, and remember what I told you about college. You're going to do great things. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, and Emma Blake walked toward the federal vehicles, knowing that the quiet life she'd built in Cedar Falls was ending exactly the way she'd always feared it would. The past finally catching up to claim her, but as they drove away from the only home she'd known in 8 years, Emma was already planning her next move. Because Agent Hayes had made one critical mistake in his investigation. He'd assumed she was running from her past, when in reality, she'd been preparing for its inevitable return. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The federal detention facility outside Denver looked like a corporate office building that had been designed by someone with trust issues. 3 stories of reinforced concrete and bulletproof glass, surrounded by enough razor wire to stop a small army, all disguised behind landscaping that suggested government efficiency rather than maximum security imprisonment. Emma sat in interview room C, her hands resting calmly on a metal table that was bolted to the floor, facing a 2-way mirror that reflected her own image back with unflattering fluorescent clarity. She'd been here for 6 hours, during which time various agents had attempted to establish rapport, apply pressure, and extract information, using techniques she'd been trained to recognize and counter. The room was designed for psychological manipulation. Uncomfortable temperature, harsh lighting, no windows, and furniture positioned to make the subject feel isolated and vulnerable. But Emma had been interrogated by professionals in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a federal prosecution, and Agent Hayes's team was playing in the minor leagues compared to what she'd experienced in black sites across 3 continents. When Hayes finally entered the room, he carried a thick file folder and a cup of coffee that smelled significantly better than the vending machine swill they'd been offering Emma for the past few hours. Miss Blake, Hayes said, settling into the chair across from her with practiced casualness, I apologize for the delay. We've been verifying some information about your background. Emma remained silent, knowing that any response would give Hayes an opening to begin his interrogation in earnest. Instead, she studied his body language, noting the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he wasn't as confident as he wanted to appear. Let's start with something simple. Hayes opened the file folder, revealing a series of military photographs. Do you recognize any of these people? The photograph showed 4 soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces partially obscured by tactical gear and desert dust. But Emma would have recognized them anywhere, her Delta Force unit, taken 3 months before the Kandahar operation that had ended her military career and forced her into the shadows. Bishop, whose real name was Marcus Webb and who'd been killed in action 6 months after the photo was taken. Knight, also known as David Rodriguez, who died in a helicopter crash that was officially classified as mechanical failure. Rook, whose civilian identity was Sarah Chun and who'd supposedly committed suicide 2 years after leaving the service. And Viper, call sign for Captain Emma Hunter, Delta Force operator specializing in close-quarters combat and tactical infiltration. Officially killed in action during a classified operation in Afghanistan. Unofficially sitting in a federal interrogation room, trying to decide how much truth she could afford to reveal. I've never seen these people before, Emma said finally. Hayes smiled and pulled out another photograph, this one showing Emma's face clearly despite the tactical gear. The resemblance to her current appearance was unmistakable, despite 8 years and careful efforts to alter her look through subtle changes in hair color, weight, and posture. Miss Blake, we have fingerprint matches, dental records, and biometric analysis that places you at multiple classified locations between 2015 and 2017. Your Delta Force record shows 37 successful missions, including the Kandahar extraction that I mentioned earlier. Emma studied the photograph of her younger self, remembering the woman who'd believed that serving her country was worth any sacrifice, any compromise, any moral flexibility that the mission required. That woman had been naive in ways that Emma Blake could barely comprehend. Those records are classified, Emma said. If you have access to them, it means someone with very high clearance authorized this investigation. The question is why? Hayes leaned back in his chair, apparently pleased that Emma was finally engaging. Because 3 of your former unit members are dead under suspicious circumstances, and the 4th has been living under a false identity while maintaining what appears to be a safe house equipped with military-grade weapons and communication equipment. Or, Emma countered, because someone wants the 4th member of that unit eliminated, and they're using federal resources to locate and neutralize a potential threat to their operations. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Hayes's expression didn't change, but Emma noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested she'd hit closer to the truth than he was comfortable with. Ms. Blake, you're suggesting that federal agents are involved in some kind of conspiracy to eliminate former military personnel. That's a very serious accusation. Is it an accusation? Emma asked. Or is it a statement of fact based on the evidence? 3 members of my former unit are dead. The 4th is sitting in a federal facility being questioned about classified operations. Someone clearly wants Delta Force Unit 17 permanently disbanded. Hayes consulted his file, but Emma could see that her words had shaken his confidence. Unit 17 was officially disbanded in 2017 following the completion of Operation Desert Viper. All personnel were reassigned or discharged according to standard protocols. Standard protocols don't usually result in 3 suspicious deaths within 5 years, Emma replied, unless the protocols were designed to ensure that certain operations remained permanently classified. Hayes stood and walked to the 2-way mirror, staring at his own reflection while processing Emma's implications. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into something more dangerous. Let's assume for a moment that you're right, he sighed. Let's assume that someone has been systematically eliminating former Delta Force personnel to cover up classified operations. What makes you think that cooperating with us is safer than maintaining your false identity? Emma smiled for the first time since entering the facility. Because, Agent Hayes, I've spent 8 years preparing for this conversation. And I have information that certain people would kill to keep secret information that's currently in the hands of someone who will release it if anything happens to me. Hayes sat back down, his casual demeanor replaced by sharp professional interest. What kind of information? The kind that explains why Unit 17 was really disbanded, Emma said. The kind that reveals which operations were legitimate military actions and which were corporate espionage disguised as national security. The kind that names the people who've been profiting from selling classified military intelligence to foreign buyers. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of HVAC systems. Hayes stared at Emma with the expression of someone who just realized he was playing chess with a grandmaster while thinking it was checkers. You're claiming that Delta Force Unit 17 was used for illegal operations? Hayes asked carefully. I'm claiming that some of our missions had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with protecting corporate interests and eliminating inconvenient witnesses, Emma replied. And I'm claiming that the people responsible for those operations are now eliminating anyone who can expose them. Hayes leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Do you have proof? Emma's smile widened. Agent Hayes, I was Delta Force. We don't go into any situation without multiple exit strategies and insurance policies. Yes, I have proof. The question is whether you're here to help me expose the truth or to help cover it up. Outside the interrogation room, through walls designed to contain secrets and confessions, the Colorado snow continued to fall. But inside, Emma Blake was finally ready to stop running from her past and start fighting back against the people who'd turned her into a ghost. The war for the truth about Delta Force Unit 17 was about to begin, and Viper had been preparing for this battle for 8 long years. Master Sergeant Lucia Rodriguez had been tracking Emma's situation from the moment the first news reports mentioned a grocery store manager who'd single-handedly defeated 4 armed robbers. The description of the tactics used, the precision of the neutralizations, and the improvised weapons techniques all pointed to one conclusion. Viper was alive, and her cover had been blown. Rodriguez sat in her truck outside the federal detention facility, watching through night vision binoculars as unmarked vehicles came and went through the secured entrance. She'd been waiting for 14 hours, surviving on black coffee and military-grade patience, knowing that eventually Emma would need an extraction dot at 51. Rodriguez was a career soldier who'd spent 28 years in special operations, the last 6 of which had been devoted to keeping former Unit 17 members alive. She'd been Bishop's handler when he died in that suspicious car accident. She'd tried to reach Knight before his helicopter went down. She'd been 3 hours too late to prevent Rook's apparent suicide, but she'd maintained contact with Viper through a network of encrypted communications and dead drops. Watching from the shadows as Emma built her new life in Cedar Falls, Rodriguez had always known this day would come, the day when Emma's past would catch up with her cover identity and force them both back into the war they'd been fighting in. Secret for 8 years, the secure phone in Rodriguez's tactical vest buzzed twice, Emma's emergency signal. Rodriguez smiled grimly and started her truck's engine. It was time to remind the federal government why Delta Force operators were considered the most dangerous people on the planet. Inside the detention facility, Emma sat across from Agent Hayes, who was trying to process the implications of her revelations about Unit 17's illegal operations. His confidence had evaporated as Emma systematically dismantled his assumptions about her case, replacing his interrogation with something that looked increasingly like a debriefing between professionals. You're telling me that Delta Force Unit 17 was being used to eliminate corporate whistleblowers and foreign intelligence assets who threatened American business interests? Hayes said, consulting notes he'd been taking for the past hour. I'm telling you that some of our missions had nothing to do with legitimate military objectives, Emma corrected. We were told we were protecting national security, but the targets were often people who discovered corporate malfeasance or government corruption. Hayes looked up from his notes. And you have documentation of these operations? Names, dates, locations, financial records, and communication intercepts, Emma confirmed. Plus testimony from the surviving operators who were willing to risk their lives to expose the truth. Surviving operators? I thought you were the only member of Unit 17 still alive. Emma's smile was sharp as a combat knife. Agent Hayes, the first rule of special operations is that you never reveal all your assets at once. Rodriguez is still active, and she's been documenting everything from the outside while I maintain deep cover. Hayes's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, and Emma saw his expression change from professional interest to genuine alarm. Problem? Emma asked innocently. Facility security reports an unauthorized breach of the perimeter, Hayes said, standing quickly. Someone with military-grade equipment just disabled our external sensor grid. Emma remained seated, her hands still folded calmly on the metal table. Rodriguez always was good with electronics. Give her about 3 more minutes, and she'll have disabled your backup power systems too. As if summoned by Emma's prediction, the fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging the interrogation room into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made Hayes look like he was standing in the middle of a nightmare. Security alert, all personnel, came the announcement over the facility's intercom system. We have an active breach. Lockdown protocols are now in effect. Emma stood for the first time in hours, stretching muscles that had been held in check. During the long interrogation, in the red emergency lighting, her posture shifted subtly, and Hayes suddenly realized he was no longer looking at a cooperative witness, but at a predator who'd been patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. Miss Blake, Hayes said carefully, his hand moving toward his service weapon. I think you should sit back down. Agent Hayes, Emma replied, her voice carrying a new authority that made the air in the room feel heavier. I think you should step away from that gun unless you want to find out why they called me Viper. The lights went out completely, and in the absolute darkness that followed, Hayes heard sounds that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The whisper of tactical gear, the soft thud of impact-dampened footsteps, and the almost inaudible hiss of a door being opened by someone who knew exactly how to defeat electronic locks. When the emergency lighting flickered back on 30 seconds later, Hayes found himself looking down the barrel of his own service weapon, which was now in Emma's hands despite the fact that she'd been sitting 6 feet away when the lights went out. How did you, Hayes began. 8 years of preparation, Agent Hayes, came Rodriguez's voice from the doorway, where she stood in full tactical gear with night vision equipment pushed up on her forehead. Viper's been ready for this extraction since the day she went into hiding. Emma ejected the magazine from Hayes's weapon and handed both pieces back to him. Agent Hayes, you have a choice to make. You can try to stop us and spend the rest of your career wondering which of your colleagues is working for the people who've been eliminating Unit 17 members. Or you can help us expose the truth and maybe save what's left of your integrity. Hayes looked between Emma and Rodriguez, calculating odds that clearly weren't in his favor. If I help you, my career is over. If you don't help us, Rodriguez said, your life might be over. The people behind this conspiracy don't leave loose ends, and you've already learned too much to be ignored. Emma moved to the door, checking the corridor with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd infiltrated hostile facilities before. Agent Hayes, 3 members of my unit are dead because they trusted the system to protect them. I'm not making that mistake. But I'm offering you the chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the cover-up. Hayes holstered his weapon and made his decision. What do you need from me? Access to the federal database on Unit 17 investigations, Emma said. Communication records between this facility and whoever authorized my detention. And a head start before you report that your high-value prisoner just walked out the front door. Rodriguez handed Hayes a secure phone. You'll also need this. When the truth comes out, you're going to want to be on the right side of history. As the three of them moved through corridors designed to prevent exactly this kind of escape, Hayes realized that he'd stumbled into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple case of stolen identity. He was now part of a shadow war between former special operations personnel and the government agencies that had betrayed them. Outside, Rodriguez's truck was waiting in the facility's parking lot, engine running and emergency equipment loaded for a long journey. As they drove away from the detention center, Emma looked back at the building where she'd spent 6 hours pretending to be helpless while Rodriguez positioned assets for the extraction they'd been planning for years. Where to now? Hayes asked. From the back seat, still trying to process how quickly his orderly federal investigation had turned into something out of a spy thriller. Emma smiled as Rodriguez guided the truck onto the highway, heading toward a destination that existed on no official maps. Agent Hayes, it's time you learned what really happened to Delta Force Unit 17, and why someone is willing to kill to keep those secrets buried. Behind them, the federal facility's lights grew smaller in the distance, but Emma knew their escape was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The safe house was a nondescript ranch property in the Colorado mountains, 40 miles from the nearest town and completely invisible to satellite surveillance, thanks to camouflage netting that Rodriguez had installed over the past 3 years. The basement had been converted into a tactical operations center that would have impressed Pentagon planners, complete with encrypted communication systems, evidence storage, and enough firepower to outfit a small army. Emma sat at a bank of monitors, reviewing files that represented 8 years of careful investigation into the systematic elimination of her former unit. Each screen showed a different piece of the puzzle: financial records, communication intercepts, travel logs, and forensic evidence that painted a picture of conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of military command. Agent Hayes stood behind her, his federal training warring with the overwhelming evidence of institutional betrayal that surrounded him. "This is impossible," he said for the 3rd time in an hour. "You're talking about a conspiracy involving dozens of people across multiple agencies." "Not dozens," Rodriguez corrected from her position at the communications console. "One person, with access to classified personnel files, operational budgets, and enough authority to authorize black operations without oversight. Someone who could order the elimination of inconvenient witnesses while making it look like accidents or suicides." Emma pulled up a photograph on the central monitor. A distinguished man in his early 60s wearing the dress uniform of a full-length colonel, his chest decorated with ribbons that spoke of 30 years of distinguished military service. His face was familiar to Hayes from congressional hearings and Pentagon briefings. "Colonel James Sullivan," Emma said, her voice carrying a weight of betrayal that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. "Our former commanding officer. The man who sent us on missions that had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with protecting corporate interests." Hayes stared at the photograph. "Sullivan's a decorated war hero. He's been nominated for promotion to general. You're saying he's been running illegal operations and murdering his own soldiers?" "I'm saying he's been selling military assets to the highest bidder," Emma replied, pulling up a series of financial records. "Shell companies, offshore accounts, payments that coincide exactly with Unit 17 missions that eliminated corporate whistleblowers and foreign intelligence assets." Rodriguez moved to a wall map that showed locations across 3 continents, each marked with colored pins representing different operations. Red pins are legitimate military targets. Blue pins, are what we thought were legitimate targets, but turned out to be people who discovered corporate malfeasance. Yellow pins are the locations where Unit 17 members have died under suspicious circumstances. Hayes studied the map, his federal investigator's mind automatically processing patterns that were impossible to ignore. The timeline matches, he admitted reluctantly. But how do you prove Sullivan was behind the murders? Emma smiled grimly and activated another monitor, which began playing an audio recording. Sullivan's voice filled the room, discussing operational details with someone whose identity was obscured by voice modulation software. The Unit 17 problem needs to be resolved permanently, Sullivan's recorded voice said. Bishop's accident was clean, but Knight's helicopter crash drew too much attention. We need more subtle approaches for the remaining assets. Rodriguez has been documenting his communications for 2 years, Emma explained. We know about the Swiss accounts, the corporate connections, and the kill orders he's issued for every surviving member of Unit 17. Hayes sank into a chair, the full scope of the conspiracy finally sinking in. If this is true, then my investigation was compromised from the beginning. Sullivan has contacts throughout the federal law enforcement community. More than contacts, Rodriguez said, consulting her intelligence files. He's been feeding information to friendly agents, directing investigations away from dangerous areas, and ensuring that any evidence of Unit 17's illegal operations stays buried. Emma stood and walked to a secure filing cabinet, removing a thick folder that contained the crown jewel of their evidence collection. Agent Hayes, what I'm about to show you will end Sullivan's career, expose a decade of illegal operations, and probably result in congressional hearings that will shake the Pentagon to its foundations. She spread photographs across the tactical table, images of Sullivan meeting with foreign intelligence operatives, documents showing payments for classified information, and communications proving that he'd been selling American military secrets, while eliminating anyone who could expose his activities. This is why Bishop, Knight, and Rook had to die, Emma continued. They'd started asking questions about our missions, connecting dots that led back to Sullivan's corporate sponsors. He couldn't risk them exposing the truth. Hayes studied the evidence with growing horror. How long has this been going on? At least 10 years, Rodriguez answered. Possibly longer. Sullivan's been using special operations units as his personal assassination squad while building a network of corporate and foreign intelligence contacts who pay premium prices for classified American military capabilities. Emma pulled up one final document on the monitor, a kill order with Sullivan's digital signature, dated 3 days ago and bearing a familiar name. Agent Hayes, she said quietly, you should know that Sullivan issued termination orders for both of us the moment you took me into custody. Your federal investigation was supposed to end with my death in custody and your accidental elimination as a security risk. Hayes stared at his own name on the kill order, finally understanding that his choice to help Emma hadn't just been about justice, it had been about survival. What do we do now? He asked. Rodriguez began packing equipment into tactical cases. Now we take the fight to Sullivan before he realizes his federal assets have been compromised. He's scheduled to attend a classified briefing at Peterson Air Force Base tomorrow morning. If we move fast, we can intercept him before he has a chance to disappear into whatever extraction network he's built for himself. Emma checked her sidearm and began donning tactical gear that she hadn't worn in 8 years. The familiar weight of combat equipment felt like coming home after a long exile. Agent Hayes, she said, you can still walk away from this. Contact your superiors, report that I escaped, and go back to your normal federal investigations. No one will blame you for losing a high-value prisoner to a military extraction team. Hayes looked around the safe house at the evidence of massive institutional betrayal, at the weapons and equipment that suggested the coming confrontation would be anything but subtle, at the 2 women who dedicated years of their lives, to exposing a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the American military establishment. "No," he said finally. "Sullivan put my name on a kill list. That makes this personal." Emma smiled, recognizing the moment when a by-the-book federal agent transformed into someone willing to operate outside the system to serve justice. "Welcome to the Shadow War, Agent Hayes," she said. "Hope you're ready to learn what it really means to serve your country." Outside, the Colorado wind howled through the mountain peaks, but inside the safe house, three unlikely allies prepared for a confrontation that would either expose the truth about Delta Force Unit 17 or get them all killed in the attempt. Colonel James Sullivan had spent 8 years eliminating witnesses to his crimes, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated the two operators who'd survived his purge and spent those years preparing for exactly this moment. Viper was done hiding, and the hunt was about to begin. Peterson Air Force Base sprawled across the Colorado Springs landscape like a small city dedicated to the business of national defense, its runways and hangars buzzing with the constant activity of military aircraft and personnel. Colonel James Sullivan's staff car passed through the main gate at 0630 hours, 40 minutes before his scheduled briefing with Pentagon intelligence officials who had no idea they were about to meet with a traitor 3 miles away. Emma lay prone on a ridge overlooking the base's eastern perimeter, her eye pressed to the scope of a rifle she hadn't touched in 8 years. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend who specialized in solving problems from a considerable distance. "Target acquired," she whispered into her throat microphone. "Sullivan's vehicle just entered the base. He's proceeding toward Building 47 as scheduled." Rodriguez's voice crackled through Emma's earpiece from her position inside the base's communication center, where she'd infiltrated using credentials that were technically still valid despite her unofficial status. "Security feed shows Sullivan has 4-man protection detail, plus base security. This isn't going to be subtle." Agent Hayes, positioned in a rental car outside the base's visitor center, felt his palms sweating despite the morning cold. In 18 years of federal law enforcement, he'd never participated in anything that could be described as a military assault on a United States Air Force installation. "Are you sure there isn't a legal way to handle this?" he asked through his borrowed communication gear. "Sullivan has contacts throughout federal law enforcement," Emma replied, adjusting her scope for wind and distance. "The moment we go through official channels, he disappears into whatever extraction network he's built. This is our only chance to take him alive." Sullivan's car stopped in front of Building 47, a nondescript structure that housed some of the military's most sensitive intelligence operations. Through her scope, Emma watched him exit the vehicle with the confident bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years believing himself untouchable. "He looks different," Emma murmured, studying Sullivan's face through her rifle's optics. The man she'd once respected as a commanding officer had acquired the soft features and expensive grooming of someone who'd grown accustomed to corporate boardrooms rather than military command posts. "Power and money change people," Rodriguez observed from her position monitoring base communications. "Speaking of which, we've got a problem. I'm seeing chatter about enhanced security protocols. Someone tipped them off that Sullivan might be a target." Emma's finger moved to her rifle's trigger guard as she processed the implications. "How much do they know?" "Unclear, but they're treating this as a potential assassination attempt rather than a law enforcement operation. Base security is moving to threat condition Charlie." Through his earpiece, Hayes could hear the tension escalating between his two allies. His federal training told him to abort the operation and try to find another way to apprehend Sullivan. But the kill order with his name on it suggested that legal approaches might result in his own death. "What's the play?" he asked. Emma watched through her scope as additional security personnel deployed around Building 47, their positions suggesting they were preparing for an assault from multiple directions. Professional work that indicated Sullivan's people had anticipated exactly this kind of operation. "They're expecting a traditional military assault," Emma said, her mind automatically calculating new angles and approaches. "Rodriguez, can you create a distraction on the south side of the base? Something that will draw security away from Building 47? "Already on it," Rodriguez replied. "Fire alarm in the commissary should pull at least half their security detail. Give me 2 minutes." Emma shifted her position, moving along the ridge to a vantage point that would give her a clear shot at Building 47's main entrance. But as she settled into her new firing position, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. "Hayes," she said urgently, "get out of there, now. What's wrong?" "There's a sniper team on the roof of the visitor center. You're sitting in their kill zone." Hayes looked up through his windshield and saw the distinctive outline of a military sniper rifle pointed directly at his position. He started his car's engine and pulled away from the curb just as the first bullet shattered his rear window. "They're trying to eliminate us before we can reach Sullivan," Emma said, watching through her scope as tactical teams deployed around the base with coordinated precision. "This whole briefing was a trap." Rodriguez's voice came through their earpieces with barely controlled urgency. "Emma, Sullivan's not in Building 47. I've been monitoring internal communications, and he never actually entered the structure. His car was a decoy." Emma swept her rifle across the base's layout, searching for alternative locations where Sullivan might have positioned himself. "Where is he?" "Hangar 18, on the opposite side of the base. He's preparing to leave in a private aircraft that's not on any official flight schedules." Emma began breaking down her rifle, preparing to relocate for what was essentially a completely different operation. "Hayes, can you reach Hangar 18? "Negative," Hayes replied, weaving through traffic as additional sniper bullets sparked off. "Nearby vehicles. I've got at least 2 teams in pursuit, and base security is coordinating to cut off all exit routes." Rodriguez made her decision. "I'm going after Sullivan directly. My credentials will get me into Hangar 18, and I can delay his departure until you two can reach the location." "Rodriguez, don't," Emma said, recognizing the tone in her old comrade's voice. "This feels like another trap." "Maybe," Rodriguez replied, "but it's the only play we have. Sullivan's been eliminating Unit 17 members for 8 years. Time to return the favor." Through the base's communication system, Rodriguez could hear the coordinated chatter of a military operation designed to eliminate 3 specific targets. Sullivan had turned Peterson Air Force Base into a killing ground, using official military resources to protect his escape while eliminating the only witnesses to his decade of treachery. Emma reached her vehicle and began driving toward Hangar 18, knowing she was already too late to prevent whatever confrontation Rodriguez was walking into. But as she navigated the back roads that would take her to the base's western perimeter, she was already calculating the tactical requirements for a one-woman assault on a military installation. "Hayes," she said into her microphone, "I need you to contact every journalist, Congressional Oversight Committee, and federal agency you can reach. If we don't make it out of this, the evidence in our safe house needs to reach people who can use it. Emma, there has to be another way. There is no other way." Emma replied, checking her sidearm and the explosive charges she'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "Sullivan's had 8 years to build his network and eliminate threats. We've had 8 years to prepare for this moment. Time to find out who did their homework better." As she approached the base's perimeter fence, Emma could see smoke rising from the commissary where Rodriguez had triggered her distraction. Military vehicles were converging on Hangar 18 from multiple directions, their headlights cutting through the morning darkness like search beams hunting for prey. Emma Blake, grocery store manager from Cedar Falls, Wyoming, took a deep breath and let her carefully constructed identity fall away like discarded camouflage. What remained was Viper Delta Force operator, and she had work to do. The final battle for the truth about Unit 17 was about to begin, and this time there would be no prisoners taken. Emma breached Peterson Air Force Base's perimeter fence at exactly 0710 hours, cutting through the chain link with bolt cutters while explosions from Rodriguez's diversionary fires lit up the morning sky. The base's security forces were spread thin, responding to multiple emergencies that had been carefully orchestrated to create exactly this opportunity. Hangar 18 sat at the far end of the base's main runway, a massive structure designed to house military transport aircraft, but currently serving as Sullivan's private departure lounge. Through her night vision scope, Emma could see the heat signatures of at least 8 personnel inside the hangar, plus the distinctive outline of a civilian jet aircraft that wasn't supposed to exist on any military installation. Rodriguez's voice crackled through Emma's earpiece, strained but professional. "I'm inside the hangar. Sullivan's here with a 6-man security team, plus flight crew. They've got heavy weapons and are positioned for a siege defense." Emma approached the hangar's eastern wall, moving with the silent precision of someone who'd infiltrated hostile facilities on 3 continents. "What's your position?" "Upper catwalk, overlooking the main floor. I've got eyes on Sullivan, but he's using his security team as human shields. No clean shot." Through her scope, Emma could see the hangar's main entrance, where 2 guards with military-grade assault rifles maintained overwatch positions. Professional work, but not professional enough to account for someone with Emma's specialized training. "Rodriguez, I'm going to create an entry point on the east wall. When you hear the explosion, move to contain Sullivan. Don't let him reach that aircraft." Emma attached plastic explosive charges to the hangar's reinforced wall, calculating blast patterns and entry angles with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before. The charges were small, designed to create an opening rather than bring down the entire structure, but they would provide the shock and confusion necessary for a successful assault. Inside the hangar, Colonel James Sullivan stood beside his escape aircraft, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't disguise 30 years of military bearing. He held a secure satellite phone to his ear, coordinating with assets that existed in the shadows of government bureaucracy. "The federal agent has been neutralized," he reported to whoever was on the other end of the call. "Rodriguez is contained inside the hangar, and Blake is somewhere on the base perimeter. Cleanup teams are standing by to ensure no evidence survives this operation." Rodriguez, crouched on the hangar's upper catwalk, listened to Sullivan's conversation while calculating her own tactical options. She had a clear shot at the colonel, but 6 security personnel would cut her down before she could confirm the kill. Better to wait for Emma's assault and coordinate their attacks for maximum effectiveness. Sullivan ended his phone call and turned to address his security team leader, a man whose military bearing suggested special operations background. "Status report. Perimeter is secure, sir. Base security is responding to diversionary attacks on the south side, and our oversight assets confirm that Blake is moving toward this location. We're ready for her." Sullivan smiled with the confidence of someone who'd spent 8 years staying ahead of the people hunting him. "Gentlemen, you're about to face one of the military's most lethal operators. Captain Emma Hunter, callsign Viper, has more confirmed kills than most entire units. Don't underestimate her capabilities." "With respect, sir," the team leader replied. "She's 1 woman against 8 professionals. The odds are in our favor." "The odds were in favor of 4 armed robbers in a grocery store," Sullivan countered. "They're all in federal custody now, and Blake walked away without a scratch. Don't assume this will be easy." Emma's explosive charges detonated at 0714 hours, blowing a 6-foot hole in the hangar's eastern wall and filling the interior space with smoke, debris, and the kind of chaos that provided perfect cover for a tactical assault. She rolled through the breach as concrete fragments were still falling, her weapon up and tracking targets with lethal precision. The first security guard died before he could turn toward the new threat, Emma's suppressed pistol putting 2 rounds. Center mass as she moved toward cover behind a maintenance cart. The second guard managed to get his rifle oriented toward her position, but Rodriguez's shot from the catwalk caught him in the shoulder and spun him away from his weapon. "Contact east wall," the team leader shouted, directing his remaining personnel toward Emma's position while trying to maintain protection around Sullivan. "Overlapping fields of fire. Watch for crossfire with overwatch positions." Emma moved through the hangar like smoke, using smoke grenades and industrial equipment for concealment, while systematically eliminating Sullivan's security team. Her 8 years of preparation had included constant training, muscle memory exercises, and tactical simulations that kept her skills sharp despite her civilian cover identity. Rodriguez provided precision fire support from her elevated position. Her shots coordinated with Emma's movement to create a crossfire that made effective counterattack impossible for Sullivan's remaining defenders. "Sir, we need to abort," the team leader called to Sullivan as his personnel were systematically eliminated by 2 operators who moved with supernatural coordination. "Board the aircraft now and we'll provide covering fire for takeoff." But Sullivan was no longer listening to tactical advice. He was staring at Emma Blake as she emerged from the smoke and chaos, her weapon trained on his center mass with the steady precision of someone who'd never missed a shot that mattered. "Hello, Colonel," Emma said, her voice carrying 8 years of suppressed anger. "We need to talk." Sullivan's remaining security personnel had taken defensive positions around the aircraft, but they were clearly outmatched by 2 operators who'd spent years planning for exactly this confrontation. Rodriguez had moved to a position where she could prevent anyone from reaching the aircraft's boarding stairs, while Emma maintained a direct line of fire to Sullivan himself. "Captain Hunter," Sullivan said, straightening to his full height despite the weapons trained on him. "I must say, you've exceeded my expectations. 8 years in hiding, and you still move like the operator I trained." "You didn't train me to murder innocent civilians," Emma replied. "You didn't train me to sell military secrets to foreign buyers. And you sure as hell didn't train me to eliminate my own unit members to cover up treason." Sullivan smiled, but his eyes never stopped, calculating escape routes and tactical options. "Captain, you have no idea what you're interfering with. The operations you're calling illegal were authorized at the highest levels of government. Corporate espionage, foreign asset elimination, witness removal, these are tools of national policy in the modern world." "Then why did Bishop Knight and Rook have to die?" Emma asked, her finger taking up slack on her weapon's trigger. "Because they were weak," Sullivan replied. "They couldn't handle the moral complexity of serving their country in the real world. They were going to expose operations that keep America competitive in a hostile global environment." Rodriguez's voice came through Emma's earpiece, urgent and professional. "Emma, base security is moving toward our location. We've got maybe 3 minutes before this place is surrounded by people who don't know the real situation." Emma looked at Sullivan, recognizing the moment when 8 years of hunting finally came down to a single decision. She could kill him, now ending the threat he represented, but destroying any chance of exposing the network of corruption that had enabled his crimes. Or she could take him alive and risk letting him escape justice through the same system he'd been manipulating for years. "Colonel James Sullivan," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 6 years serving her country with honor. "You're under citizen's arrest for treason, murder, and conspiracy against the United States of America." Sullivan's smile widened as military vehicles surrounded the hangar, their headlights turning the interior into a stage where the final act of Unit 17's story would be performed. "Captain Hunter," he said, "you have no idea what you've just started." The standoff inside Hangar 18 lasted exactly 47 seconds after base security surrounded the building, But those 47 seconds changed everything. Emma held Sullivan at gunpoint while Rodriguez maintained overwatch from the catwalk. Their weapons trained on a man who'd spent 8 years believing himself untouchable. Outside, the voices of military police officers echoed through bullhorns, demanding surrender from what they assumed were terrorists who'd infiltrated Peterson Air Force Base. They had no way of knowing they were witnessing the final confrontation between a decorated colonel and the soldiers he'd betrayed. "You won't shoot me, Captain," Sullivan said with the confidence of someone who'd spent years studying Emma's psychological profile. "You're not a murderer. You're a soldier who follows rules, even when those rules don't serve justice." Emma's finger remained steady on her weapon's trigger, but Sullivan was partially right. 8 years of civilian life had changed her, softened edges that had once been sharp enough to cut through moral ambiguity without hesitation. "Maybe not," Emma replied, "but I don't have to be the one who pulls the trigger." Agent Hayes's voice crackled through their communication system from his position outside the base perimeter. "Emma Rodriguez, I've got multiple federal agencies en route. FBI, NSA, Defense Intelligence, everyone wants a piece of this. But more importantly, I've transmitted your evidence files to every major news organization and Congressional Oversight Committee in Washington." Sullivan's confident expression flickered for the first time since the confrontation began. "You've doomed this country's intelligence capabilities for the next decade." Those operations were protecting American interests. Those operations were lining your bank accounts, Rodriguez called down from her elevated position. "We've got the financial records, Colonel. Swiss accounts, corporate payoffs, money transfers that coincide exactly with Unit 17 eliminations." The hangar's main door burst open as military police officers stormed the building, their weapons drawn and voices shouting commands that created a chaos of overlapping authorities. But before they could establish control, another voice cut through. The confusion with the kind of authority that stopped trained soldiers in their tracks. "Stand down. Federal jurisdiction." General Patricia Morrison, head of military intelligence oversight, strode into the hangar followed by a team of defense intelligence investigators whose credentials trumped everyone else's authority. Morrison was a legend in intelligence circles, known for her incorruptible integrity and her willingness to destroy careers when military personnel betrayed their oaths. "Colonel Sullivan," Morrison said, her voice carrying 30 years of command authority, "you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and the murder of United States military personnel." Sullivan straightened to attention despite the weapons. Still trained on him, his military conditioning overriding years of corporate corruption. "General Morrison, I protest this irregular procedure. These individuals are terrorists who've infiltrated a secure military installation." Morrison consulted a tablet containing the evidence that Hayes had transmitted to federal authorities. "Colonel, we have financial records showing payments from foreign intelligence services, communication intercepts proving you ordered the elimination of Unit 17 personnel, and testimony from surviving operators detailing the illegal nature of missions you authorized." Emma lowered her weapon as defense intelligence agents moved to secure Sullivan, recognizing that the moment for personal justice had passed and institutional justice was finally taking its place. "Captain Hunter," Morrison addressed Emma directly, using her military rank despite 8 years of civilian status, "your actions today have exposed one of the most serious breaches of military integrity in modern history. The evidence you and Master Sergeant Rodriguez compiled will result in congressional hearings and a complete overhaul of special operations oversight." Rodriguez climbed down from her catwalk position, her weapon secured, but her eyes never leaving Sullivan as he was processed for federal detention. "General, how many of our people died because we trusted the system to protect them?" Morrison's expression reflected the weight of institutional failure. "Too many, Sergeant. But your persistence in documenting Colonel Sullivan's crimes means their deaths weren't in vain. Justice will be served." As Sullivan was led away in restraints, he turned back toward Emma one final time. "Captain, you think you've won, but this network extends far beyond one colonel. The people I worked with will continue operations with or without me." Emma met his gaze with the calm certainty of someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for exactly this possibility. "Then we'll be waiting for them too." Agent Hayes finally arrived at the hangar, having talked his way through multiple security checkpoints, using federal credentials that were probably no longer valid after his participation in an unauthorized military assault. He approached Emma and Rodriguez with the expression of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered. "What happens now?" he asked. General Morrison answered for them. "Now, Agent Hayes, you help us dismantle the network that enabled Colonel Sullivan's crimes. Your federal investigative skills, combined with Captain Hunter and Sergeant Rodriguez's operational knowledge, will be essential for identifying and prosecuting his co-conspirators." Emma looked around the hangar where her 8-year battle for justice had finally reached its conclusion. Military personnel were securing evidence, federal agents were coordinating jurisdictional issues, and journalists were already calling congressional offices demanding answers about Unit 17's illegal operations. "General," Emma said, "what about the families of the Unit 17 members who were murdered? Bishop's widow, Knight's children, Rook's parents, they deserve to know the truth about how their loved ones died." Morrison nodded gravely. "Full disclosure, Captain, they'll receive official notification that their family members died serving their country, along with compensation for the government's failure to protect them from internal threats." Rodriguez approached Emma as the hangar continued to buzz with investigative activity. "So what now, Viper? Back to groceries in Wyoming?" Emma smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for 8 years. "Actually, Rodriguez, I think Cedar Falls could use a new deputy sheriff. Sheriff Turner's been saying he needs someone with specialized training to help with complex investigations." "And you?" Emma asked her old comrade. Rodriguez grinned. "General Morrison's offered me a position in military intelligence oversight. Turns out, they need someone with experience in detecting and preventing the kind of corruption that Sullivan represented." Agent Hayes overheard their conversation and approached with something that might have been relief. "If you're both staying in law enforcement, I'd like to request a transfer to whatever unit investigates federal corruption. I've seen what happens when good people look the other way, and I don't want to be part of that system anymore." As the sun climbed higher over Peterson Air Force Base, Emma Blake realized that her story wasn't ending. It was beginning a new chapter. The quiet grocery store manager who'd tried to disappear into small-town anonymity had evolved into something more dangerous and more necessary, a guardian who specialized in protecting the innocent from the people who were supposed to protect them. Colonel Sullivan's network would be dismantled. His co-conspirators would face justice, and the families of Unit 17's murdered members would finally learn the truth about their sacrifices. But more importantly, the system that had enabled such corruption would be reformed by people who understood the cost of looking away. When institutions betrayed their foundational principles, Emma Blake had spent 8 years running from her past as Viper. But now she understood that some identities weren't meant to be abandoned. They were meant to be evolved into something better. The war for Unit 17's honor was over, but the battle for institutional integrity was just beginning. 6 months after the Peterson Air Force Base incident, Cedar Falls, Wyoming looked exactly the same as it always had. But the woman walking down Main Street in a deputy sheriff's uniform represented a fundamental change in how the town thought about protection and justice. Emma Blake, she'd kept the name that had given her 8 years of peace, adjusted her badge and smiled at Mrs. Murphy, who was emerging from the post office with her weekly correspondence. The elderly woman still flinched slightly when she saw Emma, remembering the violence in the grocery store that had shattered everyone's assumptions about their quiet neighbor. "Morning, Mrs. Murphy," Emma said. her voice carrying the same friendly tone she'd used as a store manager, though now it was backed by the authority of federal law enforcement certification and specialized training that most rural deputies never received. "Morning, Deputy Blake," Mrs. Murphy replied, studying Emma's uniform with the kind of curiosity that small-town residents reserved for significant changes in their community's social order. "Any word on when Kyle will be back from college?" Emma's smile widened. Kyle Chun had received a full scholarship to study criminal justice at the University of Colorado, funded by an anonymous donor who appreciated young people who showed courage under pressure. He called Emma every week, updating her on his studies and asking for advice about his future career in law enforcement. "He's doing well," Emma said. "Dean's List this semester, and he's already talking about internships with federal agencies that specialize in corruption investigations." Sheriff Bob Turner emerged from the diner with a cup of coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who'd made the right decision in hiring help that was significantly overqualified for normal small-town police work. "Emma," he called, approaching with the easy familiarity they'd developed over months of working together, "we've got a situation developing over in Millfield. State police are requesting assistance with what they're calling a complex federal matter. Sound like something you'd be interested in?" Emma's expression sharpened with professional interest. Since joining Turner's department, she'd consulted on 17 cases that had connections to federal corruption, military fraud, or conspiracy investigations. Her reputation had spread through law enforcement networks, creating an unofficial referral system for situations that required someone with specialized knowledge of how institutional betrayal operated. "What kind of complex federal matter?" Emma asked. Doc Turner consulted his notepad. 3 former military contractors found dead under suspicious circumstances, all of them whistleblowers who'd been providing information to congressional oversight committees about defense spending irregularities. Local authorities are calling it coincidence, but the FBI is treating it as a potential continuation of the Sullivan Network. Emma felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied news of institutional corruption claiming new victims. Sullivan himself was serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security federal prison, but his network of corporate sponsors and government collaborators had proven more resilient than anyone had anticipated. "I'll need to make some calls," Emma said, pulling out a secure phone that connected her to a network of federal agents, military investigators, and congressional oversight specialists who'd become her unofficial partners in hunting down corruption. Wherever it tried to hide, her first call went to Agent Hayes, who'd been promoted to head a new FBI task force specializing in government corruption cases. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd found his true calling in exposing institutional betrayal. "Emma," Hayes said without preamble, "I was about to call you. We've got 3 suspicious deaths in Colorado that match the pattern Sullivan used for eliminating witnesses. How quickly can you get to the scene?" 2 hours, Emma replied, already calculating travel time and evidence collection requirements. "What do we know about the victims?" All 3 were former contractors for Blackwater-style military companies. All 3 had testified before congressional committees about fraudulent billing practices, and all 3 died in what local authorities are calling accidents despite forensic evidence suggesting homicide. Emma's second call went to Rodriguez, who'd become one of the Pentagon's most effective internal investigators, specializing in identifying and dismantling corruption networks that operated inside military command structures. "Lucia," Emma said. When Rodriguez answered, "I need everything you have on military contractors who've been eliminated for whistleblowing activities in the past 6 months." Rodriguez's response was immediate and professional. "Already compiling that data. We've identified 14 suspicious deaths across 7 states, all involving people who'd provided information about defense contract fraud. Someone's running a systematic elimination campaign. Same network as Sullivan? Evolved from Sullivan's network," Rodriguez corrected. The colonel was middle management. The people who hired him are still operational, and they've learned from his mistakes. More subtle, better protected, harder to trace. Emma felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven her through 8 years of patient investigation. The battle against institutional corruption wasn't a war that could be won in a single confrontation. It was an ongoing campaign that required constant vigilance and the willingness to confront threats wherever they emerged. "Sheriff," Emma said to Turner, "I need to request extended leave for federal consultation work. This case is going to require weeks of investigation across multiple states." Turner nodded, understanding that Emma's specialized skills were needed for challenges that went far beyond Cedar Falls' normal law enforcement requirements. "Take whatever time you need, and Emma, be careful. These people have already proven they're willing to kill to protect their secrets." As Emma prepared for another deployment into the shadow war between institutional corruption and justice, she reflected on how much her life had changed since the morning when 4 armed robbers had walked into her grocery store. The quiet civilian identity she'd constructed had evolved into something more complex and more necessary, a bridge between the specialized skills of military special operations and the institutional authority of civilian law enforcement. Blake's Corner Market had been sold to a local family who maintained Emma's customer service standards while adding their own personality to the business. The basement weapons cache had been donated to a federal task force that specialized in providing protection for whistleblowers and corruption investigators. The safe house in the Colorado mountains had become a training facility where federal agents learned advanced surveillance detection and counterintelligence techniques. But the most important change was in Emma herself. She was no longer running from her identity as Viper. She was using those skills to protect people who couldn't protect themselves from the institutional betrayal that had once nearly destroyed her. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Kyle, now halfway through his first semester of college. "Emma, saw the news about the contractor deaths. Be safe out there. The world needs more people like you." Emma smiled, remembering the terrified teenager who'd hidden behind a potato chip display while armed robbers threatened his life. Kyle's transformation from frightened victim to aspiring federal investigator represented the kind of positive change that made all the risks worthwhile. As she drove toward Millfield to begin another investigation into the networks that preyed on American institutions, Emma realized that her story wasn't about hiding from the past or seeking revenge for betrayal. It was about using hard-earned skills to build a future where corruption couldn't flourish in the shadows, where whistleblowers didn't have to fear for their lives, and where institutions served the people they were created to protect. Deputy Emma Blake, formerly Captain Emma Hunter, call sign Viper, was exactly where she belonged, in the fight for truth, justice, and the principle that no one was above the law. The grocery store manager's deadly secret had become a public servant's greatest strength. And the hunt for justice would continue as long as there were people willing to sacrifice their safety to expose the truth. In Cedar Falls, Wyoming, where time moved differently and secrets had a way of finding the light, Emma Blake was home at Cosima. Last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.